Hi everyone, thanks so much for your support and thanks so much for this huge milestone of 150,000 subscribers. That's awesome. I just want to say an honest, heartfelt thank you. There have been some amazing questions here. In fact, some of the questions really require more depth than just a quick answer. So actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer a bunch of your questions today, but then over the coming weeks, I'm going to be producing short videos like 3 to 5 minutes long, where I'm going to go into more depth in some of your questions, because some of the questions you were asking really require, I think, a more in-depth answer, which wouldn't really work in a kind of Q&A video like this. So anyway, let's get straight to the questions. And then if I haven't answered your questions here, there's a pretty good chance that I will have answered your question in a video coming up in the next few weeks, in a little more depth. So Cornelius says, who is the most underrated composer pre-20th century? That's pretty hard to answer, because if a lot of people knew about them, they wouldn't be underrated, and I'm not sure how extensive my knowledge is of unheard of composers. And maybe Hugo Wolf. I would say Mendelssohn, but maybe he's not underrated. But pretty much everything Mendelssohn wrote is incredibly beautiful, really touches the soul. But maybe Hugo Wolf, because the music he wrote wasn't really for the concert hall. He mostly wrote song. He mostly wrote for piano and voice. But the music he wrote is kind of post-Wagnerian and really intensely emotional and intensely expressive in its power, and it's really worth listening to the best of Hugo Wolf's songs, because it really is incredible music. That's for pre-20th century. Had you asked me the most underrated composer of the 20th century, I could list off a dozen or more. Szymanowski would be the first composer I'd think of for 20th century underrated, but you said pre-20th century. So Hugo Wolf, let's say. Aparacity says, what is your favorite Mahler symphony? Maybe 2, maybe 8, maybe 9. The first classical piece that I ever heard by professionals in a live concert setting was Mahler 8. So that's always held a kind of really dear position in my heart, because then I went and bought a bunch of CDs of it and I listened to it half 100 times. So I feel like I know Mahler 8 backwards, and I really do just love that piece of music. And it's often overlooked compared to the second or the first or the fifth or the third or ninth. But Mahler 8 is really this extraordinary tapestry of mega orchestra writing. David says, who is your favorite composer and why so? I don't really have favorites anymore, because when you listen to so much music, you begin to realize that there's so much amazing stuff out there that you don't really, you stop having favorites. And also, you go through phases. Like sometimes you're studying Beethoven and you just absolutely love Beethoven and you want to listen to everything that Beethoven's written, and you're listening to all his piano sonatas and symphonies and everything. And then you sort of go out of phase with that, and for a while you listen to Beethoven and you're like, oh, this is boring. I don't want to listen to any Beethoven. I'm more in a Mahler mood. I'm in a Mahler phase of life, or a Wagner phase of life, or a 21st century phase of life than I am in a Beethoven mood. I don't care about Beethoven. So I think it really depends on what mood you're in. But I don't have favorites anymore. And I think when you listen to so much from so many different people, you start loving so many different things that you can't have a favorite anymore. Parsa says, I'd love to know about forms like caprice, rhapsody, fantasy. How do loose forms use the development of ideas to convey that sense of musical journey? Well, these forms like rhapsody and fantasy and things, the idea is that they escape the strictures that other forms have. Having a strict form is a beautiful thing. Shakespeare wrote 150, 100 and something sonnets, where he had to convey this solid poetic idea in only 14 lines of iambic pentameter. And those sonnets arguably wouldn't have had that terse emotional power had he just had free reign and writing in prose and everything. And it's the same with, sonata form or something, that actually having that strict form that you have to write to forces you to be creative and forces you to be terse with your ideas. Whereas a fantasy or a rhapsody, the idea is that you have more free reign to do what you like, and you don't have to obey the strictures of form. But in any case, they still follow the central idea of classical music, at least since Bach and before Bach even. The central idea of classical music, which is we present material and then we improvise on and we develop that material. That's the essence of all classical music, presenting an idea and then a sort of working out of the full potential of that idea. So a rhapsody just does that, or fantasy. First movement of the Moonlight Sonata is a working out of this bum ba bum and a secondary idea yum bum, or I mean something like that. But it's taking it into a more free form, but it's still presenting an idea. Or is it Mozart Rhapsody in D minor, or is it Fantasy in D minor? I can't remember. Takes an idea and develops it with a more freestyle, but it's still the same concept of giving you an idea and then developing it. Jameson says, "What are some clever composing techniques that have really amazed you?" That's a difficult question. I'm not sure I've had my mind blown in music in recent years, sadly, but either maybe the use of old forms in modern music. So, like in West Side Story, Bernstein uses. There's a song called "Cool," and Bernstein has this insane jazz fugue in the middle of it. Or Brahms in Brahms's Geistliches Lied, which is a choral piece. He has this impeccable double canon in the vocal parts going throughout, where there's two different parts in canon with each other. I think it's at the 10th or something. But it's this such beautiful, honest, expressive piece of music that you would never know that it was in double canon the whole way through if you listen to it. You'd think it was just this emotional piece of music, but then you look at it and you realize that the whole thing is kept in double canon the whole way through. Or, on the other hand, what's amazing is composing techniques which push the boundaries of sound, or which really inventive with the boundaries of sound. I was listening to a piece by a new composer, Paul Mortilla. It's a piece called Aporia. It's this like dance trance orchestral piece of music. And it was I heard this live in a massive concert hall where there were 7 different sections of the orchestra, and they were each tuned to a slightly different A. So these 7 sections were all sort of out of tune with each other. But this explosion of sound brought this massive concert hall to life. And I just remember in particular there was one moment where the organ, it was Wolsey Hall in New Haven, and the organ went full on. This great beast of an organ plays full, so your rib cage is shaking. There's this full loud chord, and then suddenly, midway through the chord, they turn the organ off. The organist just switches the organ off. So it's this incredible sonic moment where the wind is blasting through the organ pipes, and suddenly the wind just wears out. It turns off like a doo. So it's as you hear this huge organ turn. Incredible moment. And then there's also music which makes a dramatic, a nod to some kind of story or something without being too on the nose. Macmillan's 7 Last Words, for example, where you feel, through the sound, you feel these hallucinations on the cross as Christ is dying from thirst, or you hear the hammering nails into his hands, and it never tells you that they're hammering nails, but you can just hear it. You can infer it from the way that the music is written. Nodoka says, "Congrats for 150k subscribers. Since this is such an important milestone, I thought I'd ask about your projects. Can you share some information about your ideas and prospects for the future of this channel? You're such an inspiration." That's kind. Thank you, Nodoka. Yes, so something I've been thinking about for a while, and I'd really like to do, is make some kind of course, make some kind of comprehensive course in something that would be of value to my audience. And the problem is deciding what kind of course could work. It could either be a course on the history of music from, say, Beethoven to Mahler, which is my most beloved area, or it could be a course in harmony or something that you could take without, without needing a teacher over your shoulder. And so maybe a history course would be best. I wanted to do something like that, something that would be special and something that a lot of people would find valuable. But I'm not really sure what kind of course would be valuable. Harmony or history come to mind, or something like that. Or I don't know. Maybe comment below if you have any ideas about this, because I'd really value knowing what you would find valuable in a sort of classical music based course, which is teaching you something of value. Ovsem says, "What inspired you to start this channel, and what are your plans for the future?" Well, I said my plans for the future, but I was inspired by my teacher. Well, I was inspired by the fact I went to a school where no one was interested in class. Well, almost no one. About 5% or 1% of the people were interested in classical music, and you couldn't talk to anyone about your favorite pieces of classical music. No one cared, and that's fine. But I just realized that the reason people don't care is because they're not informed about it. It's not that the music is boring. It's just they maybe don't know how to listen, or they don't know anything about it. So why would they care? And so I sort of made it my mission to decide, like, I can try and teach this thing, and I can try and make more people care about this because the music's so amazing. But I think most people don't care because they didn't know about it. Like, everyone knows about film or TV or what the latest shows are on because that's really well publicized. So everyone's talking about that. But maybe I could just try and do my bit to publicize and just show how amazing this music is, and hopefully some people will have their lives shifted or discover new music because of it. So that was, and it was also a teacher that I had, and it was also, you know, watching the Leonard Bernstein lectures and watching his old TV shows where he talks to kids about classical music. That was also kind of an inspiration. Bernstein, my old English teacher who loved opera and music, and then just being in a school where people didn't care and thinking, how can I make people care? Jameson says, what is a well-kept industry secret in the world of composition or music that you'd be willing to share? If you want to be successful, then skill is vitally important. But networking and knowing people who can perform your music really does matter too. Knowing people who can actually open doors for you really does matter. So make friends and get to know people who can maybe help you. Because you can have all the skill in the world, but if you don't know anyone, then you can't get anywhere. Amy says, it would be cool to know some more stuff about you. What age you started music, what instruments you play, experiences in music. Well, I'll give you a brief. I mean, I always loved film scores. I always loved John Williams and things. But I didn't really get into music until I was about 15. I had an argument with my English teacher or my drama teacher about who was better, John Williams or Alex North. And I can't remember what we wound up saying was the answer. But he took me to a concert with a group of students of Mahler's Eighth at the Proms, and he was like, you got to go to the Proms, you'd love this. And I'd never heard of the Proms, which is amazing now because they're an incredible series of BBC concerts every summer, biggest music festival in the world. But I really truly discovered it age 15. But I was always into music, just not like classical, you know, Western art music. I always loved film music and things, and for years I played guitar, and I've always sung all my life, but for years and years I played guitar, and then I got into piano, and sadly I gave up the guitar. I wish I hadn't. My fingers have all softened up now. I got into the piano. I don't play any instrument to a national or world-class standard. Maybe that's why I got into conducting eventually, because I wanted to be a part of all this music making, and I never took up an orchestral instrument. So, yeah, that's... I could talk for years about experiences of music. That can be another video. Adrian says, are there any underrated film scores, soundtracks that you think deserve more attention and recognition than they receive? Well, I mean, Thomas Newman, as far as I know, Thomas Newman has never won an Oscar. He's been nominated like every year for the last 10 years or more. But he's never won an Oscar, even though his music is incredible and he's so diverse. The difference between like American Beauty and Skyfall is incredible, and he's never won an Oscar. He's probably not underappreciated though. Gone with the Wind is an unbelievable film score in the old romantic way of expression. Really worth watching. I mean, an incredibly made film. Some of my sort of Yale friends will say that it's problematic, but it's just an extraordinary film, and it's supposed to be problematic. I mean, she's supposed to be like a deeply ambivalent, and you're not supposed to like the characters. I mean, there's the main character in particular. That's the whole point. But the film score is just intensely expressive, and also incorporates, you know, half a dozen American revolutionary songs from the Civil War. I mean the Revolution? I mean the Civil War. About half a dozen Civil War songs, and it incorporates it, and it makes them. It does all these brilliant things. The chase sequence where they're escaping Atlanta, you hear all these little quotes of revolutionary songs. It's brilliant. Amazing score. Doga Taken. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing these names. Doga Taken says, when I hear a pop song that I've heard before, I'm usually able to immediately remember its name and artist. However, with classical music, I often have trouble remembering the name and composer of pieces, even ones I've listened to tens of hundreds of times. Do you have any thoughts or tips on this? This is maybe because pop music has lyrics, and pop music tends to be performed by the same group every time. If you hear Ed Sheeran, you can hear Ed Sheeran's voice, and it has lyrics, so you can sort of remember the song. Classical, my advice with classical is that if you listen enough to one composer, you become very familiar with their style. And so eventually, when you listen to enough of a composer, you can hear a random piece of Beethoven or Tchaikovsky that you've never even heard that piece before, and you know almost without a doubt that is Beethoven because I know Beethoven's style, or that is Tchaikovsky because I know what Tchaikovsky sounds like. Sometimes you're wrong, but you can become very familiar with a composer's style. And that's why I vouch for listening to a composer rather than listening to, the top 10 classical hits on Classic FM or something. Classic FM's great, I love it, but I really vouch getting inside a specific composer's head for a while, living with a composer, so you learn what their music is. Jameson says, Dead or Alive, who are 3 musicians or composers that you want to interview? Wagner, Mahler, and Bernstein. All because they're kind of controversial figures or fascinating sort of inside lives, but also their music is also a philosophy of life. Their music is a way of living. Mahler's music is so autobiographical and so expressive. Wagner's music is a philosophy of how to live, and he expresses philosophy through music. And Bernstein, he's a fascinating character. There's Dinner with Lenny, I think it's called. There's a book called Dinner of Lenny. It's his last ever interview, and it's a brilliant book, but also just amazing insights into this controversial figure. And I think, to be honest, these controversial figures are far more fascinating than any others. Nick Miller says, what are some of your favorite modern day composers, and how has the composition of classical music changed since the time of people like Schubert, Bach, and other influential artists like that? Favorite, again, I don't really have favorites. I mean, sometimes it'll be James Macmillan, sometimes David Briggs, sometimes John Adams. So many people. I listen to what I'm in the mood for, and I discover new things. But the difference between writing now and writing back then is there are essentially no restrictions in form anymore. And that's a blessing and a curse. Restrictions force creativity, and they sort of create a mold for which to offer your expression in a contained, focused form. As I was saying, like with Shakespeare or Milton writing Paradise Lost, that wouldn't be the same if it weren't in pure iambic pentameter. It wouldn't have the same impact if it were just free verse. Or, the restriction of diatonicism in Bach's day forced him to be extraordinarily creative to make his complex ideas work. The other change maybe is dance. Bach, all these composers wrote in dance forms to resonate with the ear of their day. So Bach had the jig or the I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, or saraband, and Haydn had the minuet, and so on. And maybe John Adams now, or Thomas Adès or someone. John Adams, perhaps his most popular piece of music is Short Ride in a Fast Machine, because we have the dum 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 repetitive beats of the club music of today, and people like John Adams definitely know how to use that to capture the attention of the modern ear. The question, I don't know who this is from. Sorry, I am an amateur composer. What do I need to do firsthand to improve my abilities? The answer is, I guess, compose. Get tuition from someone who's better than you and further down the line than you, or who knows how to do what you want to do, and learn from them, and just keep composing and keep pushing yourself slightly beyond your comfort zone, and make sure you finish what you start as well. Finish your pieces. Peterson says, I recently decided to switch my career from music to computer science with a minor in music. How can I make sure I'm still passionate about music, even if I won't make my life about it now? Well, to be honest, you might wind up more passionate about it than some of those of us who do it full time. Because to be honest, you might be the lucky one. I listen to music for leisure far less often now that I do music full time. I think actually there's something to be said for doing something else with your day job and then coming home, and to unwind, you put Tosca on your speakers at full volume and you sit with a glass of wine and you just enjoy that music because you're not thinking about music all day. So you'll easily keep your passion. I wouldn't worry about that. Marla Maniac says, congrats on 100K. I found your channel If you're reading this, thank you. Here are my biggest questions. What instruments do you play? Guitar, piano, or not? Piano, sing, baton. When did you start learning instruments? Oh, I don't remember. Why do you like classical music on a spiritual level? Because, you know, these gestures of music are you find a way to resonate with these gestures of music. This cello line in Dvorak, or this portamento violin line in Mahler. You find a way for your soul to move along with it, and that creates a kind of spiritual or emotional resonance with it. And so, a good melody or a well written line is like saying, sort of, here is my soul, sort of bared to you in music, for us to capture and for us to empathize with. So it's kind of this kind of spiritual communication between composer through the performer as the conduit to us. That's a bit fairy, I know. How much two-set do you watch? Are you a fan? I haven't. I gather they're wonderful, very funny people. I haven't watched them. Anyway, there's a lot of there. Laura says, I like your videos. I've seen your video on the Dead of Melody and I agree with your reflections. I'd like to encourage you to keep doing didactic videos. Yeah, Death of Melody I'm in two minds about, because it was meant to be sort of idea of a trend that I've noticed recently. And it was obviously hugely controversial, and it's been the most controversial video I've made. And maybe I didn't say everything the way that I really should have. And I probably wouldn't make that video today. And I've thought time and again about taking it off the air because it's received such controversy. Some people love it, and some people absolutely agree with it, and some people think it's absolutely wrong. And the idea wasn't to say melody's gone forever. The idea was to say there's this trend in popular music is going away from melody. You know, amazing things being done with sound at the moment, and hopefully people will find a way to incorporate. I don't mean melody as in this kind of twee diatonic thing, but I mean melody as in using a structure of notes to convey this line that our souls can empathize with, if that makes sense. And maybe I can elaborate more on that in future. But I'm a little wary of controversial videos because once it's out on the internet, it's out there forever. And I'm still at an age where I want to get work, and actually I've realized that I don't want to shit on other people's work because I respect what other people's doing. And I know how bloody difficult it is to find your place in the world of music. Harry says, what is your favorite opera and why? Again, I don't have favorites, but if you're new to opera, I would start with Tosca. Or if you've been in love before, then start with La Boheme. But I'd start with Tosca if you're new to opera. At the moment, my favorite operas may be Parsifal, just because I've been studying it a lot, but that could change. Parsifal by Wagner. Laurie says, what is the most important and efficient practicing technique for composer? I wish I knew. I mean, tell me if you find out. But honestly, just write. Keep pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. Force yourself to finish what you started, even though it'll be painful right up until the finishing touches. And then just do it again. And what you need to work on will be unique to you. But just keep writing, keep pushing yourself into new territories or new challenges. Challenges which are just challenging enough to stretch you without overwhelming you. Pavel says, milk first or tea? Tea. And then milk. Yes, it's green tea and then just tea. TF2021 says, actually, I've answered that already. Who was your inspiration to start the channel? I've answered that. Chase says, what do you think of the possibility of AI generated scores? I've actually answered that in a 20-minute long video on AI versus composers. I think, to sum it up, they're far from ready. But also, I've just been watching Westworld, so it's kind of interesting. But how will robots or computers, they may learn great things from machine learning, but how will they be able to express an idea which is distinctly human? The beautiful thing about poetry is that it captures human thought, these distinctly human je ne sais quoi experiences in verse, or music captures these distinct experiences which cannot be described. The Adagietto from Mahler 5 can't can't capture that, and you can't program that because it's such a distinctly human thing that he's conveying there. And I think that's very hard. You can, program all the rules in and still get nowhere near an expressive piece of music. But what do I know? It's kind of scary, the potential for machines to learn. But I'm pretty doubtful they can ever imitate true human creativity. Says, which classical composer has, in your opinion, the largest influence on modern non-classical music and on modern music at all? Maybe Wagner. Wagner, because he had such a huge impact on philosophy and on modern art in general. Tristan and Isolde in particular. I mean, changed the face of modern art because it revealed this need for modern art to, if religion is essentially dead in the modern world or dying, then it revealed this need in modern art to reveal enchantment or reveal the sacred in life in ways which are non-religious. Whether it's in there's a brilliant book on Tristan and Isolde called Sex and the Sacred, or it's called Death Devoted Heart by the late Sir Roger Scruton. Death Devoted Heart, and the final chapter, it's the epilogue chapter, and it talks about just how much of an impact Wagner has made on modern art. Daniel says, are you ever going to watch Conan the Barbarian? This is sort of a running joke on Patreon because I said I would, and I never got round to it. And I was always a little nervous because it's Arnold Schwarzenegger in a nappy. But I've listened to the music actually by Basil. I wish I could pronounce the surname. Forgive me. But brilliant soundtrack and very thematic and very full soundtrack. And I really should. Maybe I'll watch it on the plane back to England when eventually I'm no longer trapped in the US. But I hope to, Daniel. Whether I'm going to make a video on Conan, I don't know. But I plan to watch at least the first of the Conan films. Javier says, I was wondering if you see producing content for YouTube or Patreon as a viable full-time job in the near future. The content you share, not sure if being successful in YouTube is among your goals, but if so, what are the biggest challenges you face? That's tough. I'd love to make a small living off of this because I'm trying to get into composing, and of course, when you start composing, you're probably not making any money in it. And so the goal was sort of to make enough from YouTube to work on that. I never planned on being a full-time YouTuber. It could happen, but I don't know. I don't know how that works really. That wasn't originally the plan, but certainly YouTube definitely helps. And what I really want to do at the moment is think about making some kind of course that would be really valuable to you. And maybe that would be a course, as I say, on history, Beethoven to Mahler. I mean, let me know in the comments, as I said, what kind of course might be interesting to you, because it's on the cards. But the problem with me is I'm interested in so many things, and you can't do all of them. There's simply not enough time to put full focus into everything. And if I want to put full focus into composing, then I drop YouTube. And if I want to put full focus into YouTube, then I drop composing. And then I want to get fluent at piano, sight reading, and I drop something. Like, there's only so many things you can juggle on a day-to-day basis. Cody says, book suggestions? ? I've got a whole page of book suggestions on my Patreon page. And that was kind of one of the perks of my Patreon. If you pledge $2, you get access to my full reading list and watching list. Of course, that's in flux, but there's a pretty good reading list on my John Williams, without the H, just John Williams. There's similar to the following. This is good. I was wondering if you could track a particular piece or theme through its history. He says he's got a playlist of the Agnus Dei through time. A particular theme through history. Well, I've kind of done that with the Dies Irae. I've noticed, the Dies Irae was originally plain chant, do 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 do, and then Berlioz used it in his Symphonie Fantastique to sort of represent death and the horror of death. And then after Berlioz, Saint-Saëns kind of used it, and in his Third Symphony and the Organ Symphony, and Mahler in Mahler's Second Symphony, and then all the way through to John Williams in film music with Home Alone or Empire of the Sun and things like that. Like, it's become a trope of music. And I've also, in my podcast on Dvorak's New World Symphony, I talk about the way that that theme from the second movement, beautiful, famous, slow theme, you know, it has this history through time of being this American hymn and then a sort of spiritual African American spiritual, and it has this wild history um, where it's had like 6 different purposes and it's transformed. You know, on the one hand it's this Dvorak symphony thing, on the other hand it's a spiritual, on the other hand it's this hymn which once was a Puritan American hymn and now it's an African American kind of gospel thing. Crazy. Anyway, Jay says, how do you read figured bass? Practice. There's a great book on figured bass. Um, uh, I can't remember what it's called. Sorry, but practice, and then practice more, and practice with some old pieces. That, I mean, it's once you figure out what the numbers are, it's same numbers crop up again and again. I'm not fluent in figured bass. There's some really weird things I have to pause and think, but the same numbers tend to come up again and again. So um, Mo, somebody Mosemed, right? Sorry, it's got a number in the name. Moseven Emed. What is your favorite theme song? Homeward Bound. No, I just watched that film the other week. Beautiful theme tune. I don't have favorites, and I'm not saying that to be twee. I really don't have favorites. I just there's so many great themes that it's hard to. But yeah, sorry. And SLK says, would you ever consider doing a crossover video with twoset? Your style of videos are a bit different, but your channels definitely share a deep love and appreciation of music and educating others. I mean, I've not watched twoset, as I say. I gather they're very funny. I gather they're great, and they do brilliant work at like educating people, and they do these videos where they're sort of shock tech kind of talent show classical music, which is awesome. Um, I just haven't watched it because, well, just because I haven't, not because I have anything against them. I just never really watched it. It's never recommended to me on YouTube, and it's never recommended to me anywhere else. So I never got around to watching it. But I mean, I'm open to anything. Simple answer. I'm open to any collaboration as long as it sort of follows the mission principle. And sometimes I go stray of my own mission, but the mission is to spread this joy and love and appreciation of this kind of art music to a wider audience. And I know I've strayed from that in the past, but that's really the core mission. So I'm open to anything which, any kind of collaboration or anything which kind of furthers that mission. So yeah. Anyway, if your question hasn't been answered, then it may well be answered in the coming week video. But I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to support my work or ask a question more directly, then go on Patreon and patreon.com/inside the score. And thank you for the questions, and please do ask more because there's a chance I can answer them in a 3 to 5 minute video in future if it's a meaty enough question, but not too meaty. So yeah, awesome, and thanks again so much for the support and subscription. It does mean a lot.